People are like, oh no, house prices are unaffordable. No, they're not. They're half price. And people are like, what are you talking about? They're half price. I said, well, if you measure a house, and maybe this is something your listeners would want to do, measure their current house price wherever you live in ounces or kilograms of gold. Then go back 50 years, pick the mid 70s and work out what was the price of gold in the mid 70s. Now, this is going to get slightly confused by exchange rates. If you calculate how many kilos of gold, let's say, it would have cost you to buy an average house in your country 50 years ago, and how many kilos of gold does it cost now? I think most of your listeners will be surprised. In the early 1970s, you could buy a house, let's say in the United Kingdom, the average house price in the UK was £5,000. And I'm talking early 1970s. Okay. And now, I know it depends which figure you look at, but just for the sake of a figure that's pretty accurate, I would say it's around about £300,000. So the average house price has gone from, say, 5 to 300, which is a factor of 60. So if the average price of a property's gone up by a factor of 60, that's obviously great in its reference currency, but people get fascinated by the headline number. And what that completely and utterly ignores is inflation.
Hi, EnvisionAirs. Welcome to the EnvisionAir Podcast. This is the podcast where we envision living our best lives, ones filled with unlimited possibilities, by exploring everyday topics related to health, wealth, community, and love. This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered to be medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice.
This podcast does not encourage or endorse any illegal activity.
We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liability that may arise from the information in this podcast.
The views explored in the podcast may not always be those of the host.
On today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the wealth pillar of the podcast, and we're going to be talking with self-made multi-millionaire Paul Smith, who has amassed an impressive £67 million net worth with his own property investment portfolio, a property education company, an estate agency, a letting agency, and various property investment companies all over the last 42 years. Paul often shares his own experiences about his background growing up in a pit town in Yorkshire and now living what many consider a very glamorous life in Monaco, where he and his wife, Anniko, are currently based. With so many people facing financial uncertainty and mass redundancies currently taking place in the workplace, as well as a lack of accessible information on investing in property as readily available as I think it should be, I wanted to invite on the podcast a guest who has a wealth of experience and knowledge on the topic of property investment. So I am very excited that we have Paul on the podcast to speak with us and bring in his own experience about building wealth through property and what steps we can start taking today to do this ourselves. So a very warm welcome to Paul. Thank you so much for being on the EnvisionAir Podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. And thank you so much, Nicole.
Oh, amazing. And you're joining us from Monaco, which is amazing.
Yes.
How is the weather there today?
Well, it's March as we're recording this, so it's okay. I mean, I have to say it's significantly better than the UK, which is where I've spent the last 20 years. So it's sunny here about 310 days a year, and it's not sunny today, but I'm sure it will be by tomorrow. So yeah, it's good.
Amazing. Good. So I'd love to kick off this episode with your thoughts on why we should prioritize property investment in our investment portfolio. What are the benefits of doing this?
Okay, well, great question. Where I normally start is whenever I invest in anything, and yeah, majority of my investment is property, but over time, I've diversified away from just property. So we're happy to cover that if you want. But if you view, I mean, this thing here, my iPhone, broadly, my perspective is if you're going to invest in technology, or if you're going to invest in stocks and shares, or if you're going to invest in many different asset classes, fundamental question you have to ask yourself is what I call my 50-year question. Will it still matter in 50 years' time? Now, just think back, if you will, you can't because you're not 50, but if you think back over the years, how many technologies and how many products and how many services were going to be the best thing ever? And are they still here 50 years later? And I really deeply believe that. A huge influence on my life from an investment perspective is Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett says, well, he says many things, as I'm sure you know, but one of the things he says is when you invest in anything, you should invest in the spirit that if the market closed down for 10 years, you don't care. So if you invest in a property and you couldn't buy or sell property for the next 10 years, are you happy holding property for the next 10 years? And my answer to that is yes. And my answer to the 50, and I've never heard anybody use the 50-year question except me, and that's probably because I'm 60 this year, I don't know. But does it still matter? Will it still matter in 50 years' time? My answer again is yes, because if you refer to any context really of the human condition, but perhaps, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, what are the basic fundamental human requirements? Well, pretty basic to most humans are warmth, shelter, security. And what does a property represent? It represents all of those things in one go. So in the simplest possible sense, I don't think houses are going to go out of fashion. Houses, apartments, whatever, homes, let's say. And I think, therefore, they represent an excellent basis to build an investment portfolio from. Now, also to that 50-year point, virtually, if I take you back to 1971, that's when the US came off the gold standard. And since then, if you track property price growth in pretty much all the developed economies, as soon as gold is no longer linked to the fiat currency, the paper currency that all governments around the world are issuing, then property prices have exploded when measured in fiat currency, when measured in paper currency. I did a piece for YouTube a couple of years ago now because people were like, oh no, house prices are unaffordable. No, they're not. They're half price. And people are like, what are you talking about? They're half price. I said, well, if you measure a house, and maybe this is something your listeners would want to do, measure their current house price wherever you live in ounces or kilograms of gold.
Okay.
Then go back 50 years, maybe pick the mid 70s and work out what was the price of gold in the mid 70s. Now, this is going to get slightly confused by exchange rates. So if your currency has been totally destroyed by the US dollar, but the principle remained. If you calculate how many kilos of gold, let's say, it would have cost you to buy an average house in your country 50 years ago, and how many kilos of gold does it cost now? I think most of your listeners will be surprised. So to give you the metrics on that, in the early 1970s, you could buy a house, let's say in the United Kingdom, the average house price in the UK was £5,000.
Okay.
And I'm talking early 1970s.
Okay.
And now, I know it depends which figure you look at, but just for the sake of a figure that's pretty accurate, I would say it's around about £300,000. So the average house price has gone from, say, 5 to 300, which is a factor of 60.
Yeah.
For any of your listeners that are not really following me, get your phone out, get your calculator going, and let's do some numbers together. So if the average price of a property's gone up by a factor of 60, that's obviously great in its reference currency, but people get fascinated by the headline number. And what that completely and utterly ignores is inflation.
Yes.
And if you do the same thing with gold, gold has actually gone up by more than property. Now, most people, I don't know about you, when you left school or when you're at school or university or whatever, you don't get taught about inflation and the impact on different asset classes. And okay, I'm an engineer. My first degree is mechanical engineering, but my second degree is a master's in business administration. I touched on this somewhat because most MBAs will have 5 modules, one of which is finance, and I specialized in international finance. Therefore, I got dragged into cross rates, futures, spot rate, and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is, as a person that's been through all of that and has the opportunity and has put them, this is a strange combination of words, but I've put myself in the fortunate position that I've got money to invest. Nobody gave it to me. That was me. I did that. And looking at all the different asset classes that I can invest in, property is still right up there.
To this day. Yeah.
Massively up there.
Yeah.
Because it gives you 2 things. Well, 3 things, actually. Number 1, it gives the customer utility. They need it.
Yes.
Number 2, it gives you rent. So it gives you a monthly profit. And number 3, it gives you capital growth. And the institutions know that because, I don't know, what's the biggest bank in the world? Would it be probably JP Morgan?
Yeah.
JP Morgan Chase, or whatever the full name of the thing is. Now, if you want to buy some shares in JP Morgan, and you got an interview with, and Jamie Dimond's asked you for lunch or something, and you say, look, Jamie, I'm thinking about investing in your bank because I think it's quite good. Would you like to lend me 75% of the money and I'll put 25% in and I'll buy some shares? He'd kick you out. I mean, banks do not lend you even for their own shares. They're not suitable security.
Right.
Now, if you go to JP Morgan and say, oh, Jamie, I'm thinking about buying £1 million house. Could I get a 75% mortgage? He'll say yes. Now, why is it that a bank, the biggest financial institution on the planet, believes that a house is suitable security for a loan, but shares aren't, even their own shares? Had you ever thought about that?
No, I have not.
Well, there you go. So that's not an exhaustive list, but those are some reasons why I like investing in property. And maybe a different thought, because I know that people, I'm a huge fan of education. It's my highest value. It's what I do. I always say you don't really understand what it is that you're born to do until you don't have to do anything. But so I've mentioned Warren Buffett. I'm going to give you a different inspiration of mine, which might surprise you a little.
Okay.
Because it's Oprah. Okay. So
I love Oprah. I love her. Yeah.
And what she said a long time ago was, if you offer a service that's of significance, you'll be handsomely rewarded. And so many people start with the reward. They want money and they pursue money.
Yeah.
But it's not about money. And as a mathematician, as an engineer, if I've got I don't know if you can almost visualize inside my head, money is an output of the equation. The input to the equation is the service and the significance. So as an investor, I've got very, very mixed views on things like NVIDIA. NVIDIA has been the most explosive stock growth, artificial intelligence and whatever, over the last year, 18 months. Does it have any fundamental utility? I don't know. Artificial intelligence and the platforms it's built on. Is artificial intelligence itself fundamentally useful? I don't know. It's too early to say. But even if it is, NVIDIA makes chips. And ultimately, will the dominant artificial intelligence technology be based on that specific chip or not? I don't know. And if I took you back to the 1980s, for example, and some of the listeners won't know what the hell I'm talking about, but some will, a video cassette. So a video recording, the whole idea that you could stop television and you could record it and watch it at your at your leisure was absolutely revolutionary. And this was going to change the world.
Yeah.
And the 2 technologies that underpinned that were VHS and Betamax. So there were 2 competing systems. Technically, the Betamax was best, easily. No one would disagree with that.
Yeah.
But the one that won was VHS. Okay. So VHS then made some money for some years. It then got replaced by DVDs.
Yeah.
There was then this attempt to take us into micro DVDs, the small
Yes.
discs.
Yes, I remember that.
And then just think about technology and the storage of information. We've been through flash drives, hard drives, pin drives. But if you think about, in your house, do you have an extensive DVD collection?
No, we got rid of it when we moved.
Of course.
Yeah.
And, when in the 1980s, when VHS and Betamax were competing, did anyone envisage Netflix? Of course they didn't.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I could give you the same analogy for almost any technology.
Yeah.
But many people in the US predominantly, but around the world, are currently betting the kitchen sink and borrowing money against their house to put into NVIDIA shares. And I'm moderately confident it's going to end in tears.
Mm. Yeah.
And again, take you back to Warren Buffett, because he says things so much better than I do. He says that whatever you're doing, risk simply comes from not understanding the product that you're investing in.
Mm.
Can anyone claim to understand NVIDIA chips?
Not many, unless you're a software developer, maybe.
Well, yeah, but even then, potentially chips are hardware. So great, you're a software developer, fantastic. But so anyway, my general point is so many so many things that people invest in, they've got no fundamental understanding of. And if I then loop back to property,
Mm-hmm.
property is not very technical. I mean, everyone lives in one. You understand it. So where I was trying to finish there, because I don't want to, well, it's up to you. I'll happily speak on the first question for 3 days if you want. Fundamentally, do people understand what property is? And even at a relatively advanced level, because if I'm telling people, and perhaps they're going to buy a house, perhaps they're going to refurbish it or remodel it, depending on which kind of the side of the pond you're from, and you're then going to sell it in some way, shape, or form, you can have relatively advanced conversations about how you might change the configuration, how you might change it into a lounge or a kitchen diner or do an extension at the back.
Mm-hmm.
And if you translate that to a different asset class, just concepts like that we all instinctively know because we live in them, would be very difficult to have.
Yes.
And if I'm trying to explain a futures contract to someone in 2 different currencies and the impact that the Fed's base rate decision this week is going to have, that's quite a complicated conversation, and most people won't understand it. They can talk to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like they're stupid or anything, but you just don't need to have that. There's less barriers to understanding what's good and what's bad.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. And I think, so I'm just going to recap some of the things because there was so much information in what you said. I like the idea of the 50-year question. I think that's great. That's really, really that element of practicality when you're starting to invest, thinking about that from that lens. I also like the idea of the 3 benefits that you talked about, the utility element, the fact that you are going to be getting some form of income, passive income through the rent, and then obviously the capital growth. So all really great benefits that again, in this market, and people being made redundant, all of these uncertainties, I think that does seem like a very legitimate way to build property, build investment through property or build wealth through property. But then the counter of that, and a lot of people will say, well, there's just too many challenges, right?
Okay.
Like not enough time, not enough money, not enough resources, not even knowing where to start, maybe not even wanting to deal with tenants. So what would you say to those people, those concerns? Because you've done it,
Okay, well, you gave me quite a long list there. So let's just do them one at a time. So the first, well, let's call it objection. So I in my head, I view all the reasons that people don't do things as excuses. And at its simplest, you can make money or you can make excuses, but you can't do both.
Mm-hmm.
And to put that specifically into my world, in my context, I left home at the age of 17 with 170 pounds, and I've done all right. I'm not finished yet, and there's people that have done better. But I was very, very clear that within the first year, I wanted to buy a property. And as a 17-year-old, and this is true pretty much in, most developed countries, you can't get a mortgage. So the extra challenge I set myself was that I had to buy it for cash. So I had some savings because I'd been working since 14.
Mm-hmm.
But I needed a lot more money. So I set myself that as a challenge. And the most powerful weapon, the most powerful asset that we've all got to transform our current existence into the one that we want is this. It's our mind. And we were talking about, or I was talking about artificial intelligence just now. So is the brain still the most powerful computer on the planet? I don't know. It's kind of there or thereabouts, but it's certainly the most powerful one I've got. So if some clever person in Cleverland in NVIDIA or something has got a better one, good. And the brain's job fundamentally over all the years that I've studied it, and the mind's job, is to keep us sane. And if we ask ourselves the question, how can I? How can I is the most powerful question in the universe. Because what you made a series of statements, I can't do this, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough money. Now, if you make those statements, your brain will confirm that back to you. It will give you examples. It's called a confirmation bias. You will tune in and you will hear from conversations a lot of other people that are saying the same thing. And I'm going to go back to Warren Buffett again. I'm getting quite boring here in this discussion, aren't I?
No.
Warren Buffett said, to become part of the 1%, you can't follow the 99%. Now, if you dissemble that, what it means is you've got to ignore 99% of what 99% of people say. And the fundamental problem, I believe, you mentioned what? Time, money, complexity, education. You mentioned all kind of,
Yeah.
And the classic ones, by the way, that over the years that I've established are something to do with money, something to do with time, something to do with knowledge, or something to do with fear. Those are the four. And everyone will have them in some combination.
Yeah.
But underlying all of those is, what's the system? What's the system you were brought up in? What's the system I was brought up in? Broadly, nuances by country, but it's broadly go to school, work hard, get good grades, hopefully go to college or university, get reasonable qualifications and get a good job. And then you can retire happy, normally with silver hair, holding hands, walking down the beach. And, there'll be some gorgeous grandchildren kicking about in the photo somewhere. And that's just nonsense. Doesn't happen. So if we just start to pull that apart, when I went to elementary school, when I went to primary school, I was encouraged to dream. Again, mean nothing to you, but in the 1970s, I was watching this program called Casey Jones, which was in black and white. We didn't have even there, my family didn't have a television set until I was 13. And even then, we had to put money in the front of it, and there was a twist knob. It was from a company called Radio Rentals. And people of my age in the UK will be very familiar with that. So we couldn't afford to buy a television in all of my time at home. In my late teenage years, we could rent one. But anyway, the relevance of all that is that when I was around at my rich friend's house that had televisions, I would love to watch a black and white film called Casey Jones. Now, Casey Jones was an engine driver in the United States.
Okay.
A steam engine driver. Now, why am I telling you all that? I'm telling you all that because as a little 8-9-year-old boy, I wanted to be an engine driver. That was my dream job.
Okay.
I wanted to be shoveling coal and making steam come out and making a load of noise. And whether you wanted to be an astronaut or a princess, or whether you wanted to ride on dragons or whatever it was, typically until you're about 11 or 10 or 11, you're encouraged to do that. You're encouraged to dream, and nothing's impossible and everything's going to be okay. And the world is a wonderful, exciting place. Then you go to high school or secondary school. Stop daydreaming. Be realistic. Who do you think you are? Too big for your boots. Knuckle down. Work hard. And you've got fantastic business experience. I've got some business experience. Would you say that when you're in business of any kind, would you say that working together and collaborating is a useful skill?
100%. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you do your exams, if you collaborate with someone in an exam room, what's that called?
Cheating.
Yeah. So we're taught all the way until we leave university to not dream, to not collaborate. We're taught, people make it their mission for our own good to destroy our dreams.
Yeah.
And I've never bought into that, like ever.
Ever.
The specific trigger for me was when I was 14 and I went into hospital. I got a thing called Crohn's disease, and this isn't some sob story, but I spent over a year in hospital. I spent about 15 months in hospital, and I had some pretty serious operations. I lost count actually. It was 30 something surgeries, but 4 of them were life-threatening. Now, I'm a Catholic, and when you're a Catholic, if they think you're going to die, they give you something called the last rites.
Yeah.
So I had the last rites at the age of 14, and 4 times I was told, say goodbye to your mum, your dad, whoever.
Wow.
Because you're probably not going to live. This is all about context, and that was the best lesson I could ever have. I'm not recommending that to your listeners, by the way. That's a pretty extreme way of getting this perspective. So maybe learn from me on this. Many, many people tell me, and the number one of the factors you've identified, the number one is fear as to why people don't invest in property. What if something goes wrong? What if I mess it up? What if the interest rates go up? What if? And if you gave any one of your listeners a piece of paper and a pen and said, please give me 100 reasons why property investing will go wrong, bang, done.
Yeah.
I'll ask the same question. Give me 100 reasons why it would go right. Nothing.
Right.
And I get this question all the time, all the time. If I invest in your training program, or if I do what you say, is success guaranteed? And what do I say? No. Because I can train you, I can put you in the best network, I can give you the best coaches and mentors. But ultimately, if you do nothing, you will fail. You will fail. Now, why is that important? Again, with the UK reference, more than 80% of adults in the United Kingdom play the national lottery. And in most countries, there is a national lottery of some kind, where you put down £1 or $1 or €1 or 5 or something, and you might win £5 or £6 million or dollars or something. Everyone does that. Does anyone ask what's the chances of winning the national lottery? Because if they did, the answer would be 45 million to 1. And then if you look at the people that win the national lottery, what percentage of those are bankrupt within 1 year and divorced and drug addicts and alcoholics? Most of them, because they're not prepared to be wealthy. Wealth is something that needs to be earned. You need to earn the right to be wealthy. And just becoming rich, I have a huge distinction between being rich and being wealthy. They're not the same thing. Will destroy most people. But even if someone and the average success rate on, if someone comes and joins Touchstone and wants to be, my company is called Touchstone Education, the education side, they want to become a property investor. Very, very difficult to tell you what the success rate is, because people define success in different ways. Some people they love their job, and they just want an extra £3,000 or £5,000 a month or something like that. And for them, that is success. Others want to fly about in private jets and live in Monaco and whatever. And for them, that is success. So for some people, even if they amass a portfolio over the next 5 years of £10 million and they're receiving an income of £20,000 a month, that's still failure. But for other people, the fact that they've got 2 properties that give them an extra £1,000 a month is success.
Yeah.
So this would need to be in the context of people judging their own success. But to the best of my ability, looking at all the thousands of people that we've worked with over the years, If you give people the right education, you put them in the right environment, you put them in the right network, you support them in the right way, somewhere between 50 and 60% of them actually succeed by their own definition.
Yeah.
Now, put that against the context of 80% of the general population taking a risk of 45 million to 1 that's probably going to destroy their lives. I can't draw any comparisons other than that's crazy and that's not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So when you set out on a property investment journey, if you want to become wealthy through property, all the way back to high school now, and I'm thinking of my physics teacher, Mr. Scanlon. He would absolutely tear you to pieces if you tried to answer a question that you haven't defined. So the start point is, if you want to be wealthy through property, you have to define what success means to you.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, don't start. Work on defining what success means. What are you trying to do? And if I said to everybody that's listening to this, do you agree that to fail to plan is to plan to fail? They'd all say yes, because they've heard that before. And they would instinctively, oh yeah, you need a plan. What's the plan, Paul? No, it's not my plan, it's your plan.
Right.
I mean, some of our coaches next week are going, sorry, not next week, next month, are going back out to Ghana for the 3rd year running. And they work with local schools. And they help the kids there with things like ceiling fans. It would be ridiculous to put air conditioning into a school in Ghana because the school couldn't afford the electricity to run the air conditioning. Having a ceiling fan, well, that works. That helps. They put books in the library. Last time they were there, they bought 10 tons of rice. But you can intervene at a very meaningful level if that's what success means to you. There was, to me anyway, a particularly touching story of a very bright girl who wasn't getting on, and they thought it was because she needed glasses. So they took her to the optician, or they paid for her to go. So her parents took her to the optician, and the optician said, no. It's not that. She actually needs eye surgery, and it's very expensive. And the parents were like, so, thanks for helping, but, it's not your fault. And these things happen here where we live and whatever. And our coaches were like, no, well, what is this eye surgery? How much does it cost? And ultimately, she had the eye surgery, and a year, 18 months later, she's doing fantastically well. She's a super bright kid, and she can see perfectly now.
Wow.
And the eye surgery cost £50.
Wow.
Now, is that success?
For her, it is, yeah.
Well, sure. But if you're one of the people that's part of the group that's enabled that, is that a successful outcome for you? Or is it that you want a Bugatti Veyron and you want a Gulfstream 280 because that's what you want, because Elon Musk's got one?
Yeah.
And I make it no part of my business to judge what people's success is. But to give you perhaps a different example, and this might be pertinent, and maybe this is something everyone can relate to rather than dragging you off to Africa or into the sky with Elon Musk. Probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, my mum had a problem with her gallbladder. She needed her gallbladder removed. And, all the normal things. She was in terrible agony. She couldn't sleep. She was finding it difficult to eat. She was vomiting and all those things. And many people around the world think that the UK is great because of the NHS, the National Health System, and, healthcare is free and you don't need insurance. And especially versus North America, this is trumpeted by many people as a fantastic success. Well, she went along to the hospital and they said, well, Mrs. Smith, the thing is, your condition isn't life-threatening. So we will deal with it. We know you're in agony. We know you can, and she's 82, by the way. We know you can't sleep. So the thing is, we will get it done, but according to the criteria that are issued to us by the government and whatever, we will get the operation done sometime in the next 3 years.
Wow.
And it was like, what? 3 years? And then, of course, that was pre-COVID and COVID happened. So if we'd have left her in that environment, she probably would have, well, I don't know whether she'd still be alive or not, but she'd have probably had to contend with that debilitating pain for 5 years.
Yeah.
So I just said, well, that's ridiculous, Mum. Just absolutely insane.
Mm-hmm.
Just phone up the local private hospital and get it done. So
Yeah.
she got it done within 2 days, and it cost £8,000. Now, if you've got £8,000, who's not going to look after their mum?
100%. Yeah.
But most people haven't got £8,000.
Mm.
They can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to take you to a different super successful person now, because Bill Gates said there is no shame in being born poor. The shame is in dying so.
Mm.
Where you come from, Canada, where I come from, half English, half Irish, so let's just call it sort of British. And I live in France or Monaco now. We are amongst the most privileged elite in the world. Within reason, we've got freedom of speech. Because yesterday there was the elections in Russia, for example. And if you didn't want to vote for Putin, there was nobody else on the list. And if you didn't vote, you were going to jail. Would anyone that comes from our environment, our privileged background, want to relocate to Russia? I doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
Would anyone swap their privileged Western existence for China? I doubt it. Would any of us want to have been born and brought up in almost all of Africa or Latin America? I doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, without taking you through the whole world,
mm-hmm.
anyone that's born in Europe, the States, North America, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
easily in the top 10% of privileged people in the world. And if anyone is financially not making their life a success, there is only one person responsible, and it's us.
Yeah.
And until we stop moaning and griping about the fact that we're entitled to this, or it's not fair, or the government should do that, get over yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's only one person responsible for you, and it's you. Now, let's disassemble that list that you gave me. You said time. Time is your most valuable asset, and everyone's going to agree with that, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
In which case, why is everyone selling it for money?
Good one. Yeah.
That's called a job. That's
Mm-hmm.
called slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between being rich and being wealthy for me is this, and this is what property gives me.
Mm-hmm.
Every asset class will give it to you. Wealth is simply the ability to earn money in exchange for not working. That's it.
Mm.
Nobody teaches you that in school. So property and becoming a property investor, if anyone's objection is that I don't have time to be a property investor, sorry, that's why you need to be a property investor. Because if you're telling me you're too busy to become wealthy,
Mm-hmm.
why? What are you doing? Oh, I have to work really hard. Yeah, okay. Well, if you become a property investor, you won't have to work really hard.
Yeah.
And
I love
anything that anybody says to me that's anything to do with I'm too busy, nonsense. That's an excuse.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got 6 kids. So people tell me, oh, I'm really busy because I'm a parent and I've got young children. All right, how many you got? Oh, 2. Okay, I had 6. So I'm talking from personal experience.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm too busy. I'm doing my exams. Okay. What level exams are you doing? Oh, I'm doing a degree. Okay. I did my master's degree by distance learning. Took me 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And very often I was watching the tapes because it was in the early days of distance learning. There was no internet. I couldn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the 1980s and 1990s. I got videotapes delivered through the post that I had to watch of the lectures that had taken place a few days before. And most often I would watch those at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning while I was bottle feeding one of my children.
Wow.
So anybody else got more time challenges than that? Because I don't believe you. Not you, but if anyone tells me that they've got time challenges versus what I did, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
So where there's a will, there's a way. So that's time. And I don't know, do you want to dig into time anymore, or should we move on?
Well, there's just so much we have to cover, but I think it'd be really great. I was taking notes while you were talking about this. And I feel like if I was going to, like, the formula of this is the starting point is to define what success means to you.
Sure.
So that's a really good first starting point.
Yeah.
Then once the fear kind of starts setting in, maybe asking yourself, what if this works, rather than what if it doesn't
Beautiful.
work?
You got there. You're a super
Yes.
bright person.
Thanks. And then the third step would be, how can I? Basically.
Beautiful. That's the most powerful question in the world.
Yeah.
And people, okay, let me just slightly cut across you there. Sorry for this. Many people say to me, but it was so much easier in your day, Paul. You've been a property investor for 42 years. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. Let me give you some context on that as well. In the UK, I can't speak in detail to the other countries, but in the UK, the first buy-to-let mortgage, so the first specific mortgage to invest in properties, residential properties, didn't exist until 1996. Didn't exist. Today, as I'm speaking to you, there are 17 mortgage products in the United Kingdom that require a zero deposit. 17, 1-7.
Wow.
When I bought my first property, I had to buy it for cash. In my first 12 years as a property investor, going from the 1980s to 1990s, the lowest mortgage interest rate that I enjoyed was 10%. And people moan now about interest rates are so high. No, they're not. They have been historically zero for the last 15 years, but that's not normal. Put that in the context of the last 150 years, the average interest rate is 7%. So if you think interest rates are high at the moment, that's because you've got the wrong focus. You zoomed in too much.
Right.
You've never actually invested in a normal economy. You've only invested in a free money economy.
Right.
So can I just pick on maybe a couple of examples? Many people across Europe and North America will leave university with a degree and a massive amount of student debt. Yeah. Like massive amount of student debt. And what I normally say to them, and I talk to students quite often, is essentially you come out of university, you've paid the deposit on a house, but you haven't got the house. You've just got the debt. So why? Now, choosing the United Kingdom in particular, a huge amount of students' money will go on accommodation and subsistence and whatever. Why don't you do what my kids have done? Why don't you get 100% student mortgage? So when you go to no deposit required, why don't you go to university? And so one of my daughters, I've got 3 sons and 3 daughters, bought a house. She went to university in Glasgow. She bought a house relatively affordably, around about 100K, 100% mortgage. So just Google this, everyone, 100% student mortgage. So you could go to the Bath Building Society, for instance, and get a mortgage 100% of the cost of the property. It was a 3-bedroom property. Like many first years, she spent the first year in the halls of residence and she was paying £500 a month. And she knew lots of other people that were paying £500 a month. She goes and gets a property for £100,000 and the mortgage on that £100,000 property was around about £450 a month. So it's less than a halls of residence, but it's a 3-bed. So she puts 2 of her friends in the other 2 bedrooms. They continue to pay her £500 a month each. So she's now receiving £1,000 a month. She's spending £400 a month. So she's making a profit of £600 a month on her property. And it's her first investment property because when she finishes university, she moves out and she keeps it as a buy-to-let. Why can't you do that? Why can't everyone do that? You can make money or you can make excuses. You can't make both.
Yeah.
Then it gets even better in the UK because you've got a tax break called rent-a-room allowance. You ever heard of this?
No.
Okay. So regardless of whether you're paying 20% tax, 40% tax, 45% income tax, rent-a-room allowance allows you to earn £7,500 a year completely and utterly tax-free if you're renting out rooms in your property.
Yeah.
So people tell me, and I actually remember I was talking to a group of, I won't tell you where, but I was talking to a group of 200 students that were doing a master's in business administration. And I was talking to them about student debt and I was asking them how much, and I was playing that sit down bingo. Do you know what that is? Where I said, can you all stand up for me? They all stand up. Right. Can you sit down if when you finished your master's degree, your student debt is going to be less than 20K? No one moved. Is your debt going to be less than 50K? No one moved. Less than 60K, they started sitting down. And I got all the way up to £120,000 before the last person sat down.
Wow.
And I said, right, have any of you ever heard of 100% student mortgage? No. And I thought, that's interesting. I said, have you got phones and tablet? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you Google it for me?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus Christ comes back. And yeah. And then do you know what the next reaction was? The next reaction was, why didn't someone tell us?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're a bunch of entitled, I use some rude words. I actually swore at them. I said, for Christ's sake, you're sat here doing a master's in business administration and you're telling me you're incapable of using your brain and Google.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really? And then some guy came up to me afterwards and he said, I think I want to say thank you for that lecture you just gave. He said, it feels like you just hit me in the face with a brick. And what he meant was, what I told him was so fundamentally obvious, but he couldn't argue with it and it really hurt him.
I mean, I just feel like even when you were describing that to me, it makes sense. It's so obvious, but because we are not taught these sorts of lessons or ideas, creative ways of thinking, this is problematic because we're just following the system of what we're told to do.
Which is why I am deeply anti the system. None of my children have followed the system. And I'm not saying like, I'm some great parent and everybody else isn't. It's just coming back to that year I spent, or more than a year I spent in hospital when I was 14.
Yeah.
My attitude to risk is totally different to most people's.
Yeah.
Because the worst operation, I was told that I had a 20% chance of success. Now, when you've been told you've got an 80% chance of dying within the next few hours, now put, shall I invest in this investment property or not, into context. Does that seem like such a big decision?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it actually going to kill you?
Yeah.
And the next time that you're in the newsagents or you're in the grocery store and you're thinking about putting 10 or 20 pounds or dollars on the national lottery,
yeah,
think, could I be saving that towards a deposit? I gave a lecture once and there's a lady in the front row and she happened to be American. Not that that's relevant other than I remember she was American. And I was talking about serviced accommodations, Airbnb, booking.com, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was talking about some very, very basic stuff that just wound me up. I said, believe it or not, it wasn't one of mine. I just rented a booking.com place down in London last time I stayed there. And there was 4 of us, me and my wife and 2 of the kids. And they only put 4 teaspoons. They only put 4 teacups. And there was nothing to wash up with. So every time that you had a cup of tea, you had to put the dishwasher on, which was insane. And her response to me was, oh, and she told me, by the way, by way of background, that she couldn't afford to invest in any of that fancy education. She said, we were in Doncaster, which is in the north of the UK in Yorkshire. She said, don't you have Starbucks? And I said, what? And she said, don't you have Starbucks in Doncaster? I said, yeah, we do. That's why. And she said, well, why are you making tea? And my brain just started working. And I said, are you telling me that every time you want a cup of tea, you go to Starbucks? She said, yeah. I said, how many times a day do you go to Starbucks? And she said, well, it depends. 5 or 6.
Yikes.
And I said, oh. And when you go to Starbucks, how much do you spend? Said, well, I don't really think about it, but I don't know, say £10. I said, what? You're telling me you ain't got any money, but you're in Starbucks 5 times a day, spending 50 quid a day, which is like, can we call it for round numbers, £200 a week? And can we call it for round numbers, £10,000 a year? Is that about right? And she said, well, I never thought of it like that, but probably. And I said, that's after tax. She said, oh, no, I never thought about that. And I said, and you're paying national insurance. So probably you're earning £16,000 a year and giving it to Starbucks. And she just didn't believe me.
Wow.
And then I said to her, okay, I've got one final question because I'm stunned. I said, do you know how much a tea bag costs? And she said, no. And if you're in a world where people are spending £10,000 a year after tax, which costs them £15,000 of their pre-tax expenditure, and they're telling you they haven't got any money and they don't know what tea bag costs, where'd you start? I mean, what should I do first? It's like, my first house, my first flat in 1982 cost me £9,000.
Yeah.
So she's like spending 2 flats a year on Starbucks.
Wow. Yikes. Yikes.
What do you want me to do at that point?
And this is why financial literacy is so important. And it's something that I only discovered probably in the last 5 years myself, but by choosing to actually actively every day learn something new and go on YouTube
Beautiful.
or go,
Beautiful.
and it's important. And that's why the podcast has this wealth pillar, because it's so important that we all learn from experts who have done it. And just even those tidbits, those very practical tidbits that you shared about, the 100% student mortgage, the 17 mortgage instruments that are available in the UK, I mean, these sorts of tidbits, that could be life-changing to someone. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, let me just drop another couple of bombs before, just in case so it doesn't only work for students. Let me give you another one. Barclays Springboard Mortgage.
Okay.
As in Barclays Bank. Barclays Springboard Mortgage. You just Google that. They will give anyone 100% mortgage. No deposit required. As long as you've got somebody guaranteeing you. So you don't need the money. You just need a guarantor. Could be a mum, could be a dad, could be a brother, could be a sister, could be some bloke at work, whatever. It doesn't matter. You just need a guarantor.
Okay.
And then the final thing that I just want to drop in there, and I did this because people told me it couldn't be done. I invited my 12-year-old at the time, Jude, he's now 15, to read a couple of my books and see if he's interested in property and whatever. Anyway, net result, he bought his first investment property when he was 12. And
wow,
it's doing very well, and he's got other properties now. And people say to me, but that's because he's your son and you gave him a load of money. I didn't give him anything. I gave him no money. And, yeah, but, you coached him or you mentored him. No, I didn't. I gave him a book, and I told him, and I gave him access to my online courses. Oh, yeah, but, it's obviously genetic. Really? Okay, money making is genetic. I've not heard that one before, but okay. But then what proved it beyond any possible doubt to me is I'd taken Jude and some of his friends paintballing in the forest. And I could hear him, and I was driving them home, and I could hear him in the back of the car talking to 2 of his friends who were also 12 at the time. Within 6 months, one of them had gone on to buy his own house.
Wow.
Can you imagine? And what tickles me to this day is the idea of, I don't know if this happened or not, but just in their schoolroom, some teacher trying to tell them about finance or mortgages or something. And the teacher lives in a rented accommodation, and he's got 2 kids in the front row that have both got an investment property. That stuck in my head as an image of how funny that would be.
Yeah, yeah.
And the challenge that I want to give to each and every one of your listeners is, if a 12-year-old boy can do it with no money, why can't you?
That's great. Amazing. Love that. I wanted to ask you about your mindset, Paul, because I know that I've seen your content. You talk a lot about it. You incorporate it into a lot of everything you did. And even today, you talked a lot about it. And so I know you mentioned, the event that happened when you were 14 years old. That's obviously very profound. How do you curate your mindset? Because it's so easy to go down the other path, right? Of like
conformity, normality. Well, for me, there was a trigger. I actually had 3. And I maybe just briefly share them for 30 seconds. So you know about one.
Yeah.
My lifelong friend, a guy called David, went to school with him, and we were quite competitive. He was never into property. He invested in stocks and shares, and he actually ran a brokerage. And we were kind of neck and neck, and we would compare net worth and whatever. So I think the lesson there is, have you got somebody in your life? Have you got somebody in your network that you can compete with?
Mm-hmm.
Or ideally more than one person.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be quite a lonely journey. So have you got at least one other person that you can bounce off, you can challenge, and they're doing better than you, and then you're doing better than them, and then they're doing better than you, and but the real lesson he taught me was he genuinely lived, yeah, every moment that I knew him like it was his last minute. And we did so many crazy things together. And he died at the age of 47.
Sorry.
And no, it's fine. It's a long time ago now. But he left behind this fantastic wife, 3 children. And they've obviously got all sorts of other challenges because he's not there. But not a money challenge because he left them a fortune. And just the same as me, he started with absolutely nothing. And if you've got that mindset, to answer your question, you use the word, how can you cure it? Well, it's not a condition. You can't take tablets. What you can do is work on it. I mean, it's a bit like, maybe some people are a little bit flabby or they're overweight or something. Is that a condition? I don't think so. I think you can cure that with diet and exercise. And I think the equivalent of diet and the gym and exercise for the body is having a very healthy network of individuals around you that will challenge you and support you. But specifically, what he taught me is live every day as if it's your last. And he never sat down and gave it me on a piece of paper, but that's just the way he was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And because I've been around hospitals so much and because I've had various experiences, I know when people lose all of their fear and all of their inhibition, and when everything becomes totally and absolutely crystal clear. It's typically when a person in a white coat gives them a bit of paper or tells them that you've got 2 weeks to live. At that point, nothing else matters apart from setting your affairs in order, making sure that your loved ones are provided for as best they possibly can be,
Mm-hmm.
and being honest.
Yeah.
People don't pull punches when they got 2 weeks to live.
Yeah.
The mindset trick, if there is a trick, is to just tell yourself, tomorrow could be my last day. What am I going to do different?
Yeah.
You live in the dream life if, in the full knowledge that today's your last day, you don't do anything different. You consciously choose to spend every minute doing whatever it is that you want to do. And then to try and bring all this together, what clarity, because I said you need to set yourself an objective. You need to define what success means.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd maybe like to help everybody with that just a little bit. Yeah, you're right. Mindset is a massive part of why I'm doing what I'm doing. And my mentor with regard to mindset is a guy, I've no idea whether you've ever heard of him or not, is a guy called Dr. John DeMartini.
Yes. Yeah.
DeMartini is incredible. And I could tell you it'd be a different podcast. It'd probably take 2 podcasts to define my relationship with him. But I'm one of those very fortunate people that I believe he would describe me as one of his friends. And that's like, you get these questions, who would you like to have dinner with, that's alive or dead?
Yes.
Easy for me, John.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. DeMartini. And I've done that many times.
Mm-hmm.
And he calls it standing on the shoulders of giants but whatever. But if you're new to DeMartini and you want somewhere to start, and it will really help you with your life's purpose, or at least it helped me.
Yeah.
Go and read The Values Factor. It's Dr. John DeMartini, The Values Factor. And a value is, why do you exist? And there's a whole framework for determining your top 3 highest values.
Yeah.
So let me just share perhaps what are my top 3 highest values. My top 3 highest values are releasing people from all the stresses and strains to do with money. Now, I do that by educating people to become wealthy. What's the number 1 cause of stress in the world? It's money, or rather lack of money.
Mm-hmm.
And that is an avoidable state. So, maybe that's your calling, maybe it isn't, it's mine. Now, in order to be able to educate people as to how to become wealthy, I have to educate myself. I can't teach any, because you can, there's a separate study and probably not worth time to go into it. But the way in which you really know that you have grasped the subject is when you teach it to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is the apex.
Yes.
You can believe that you know something. The only way that you can really prove to yourself, and you can be battle tested if you like, is when you routinely teach that to very bright people and you answer their questions.
Yeah.
So number one for me is enabling other people to become wealthy through education.
Yeah.
Number two is educating myself. And number three is becoming enormously wealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Why? No one's going to listen to me if I don't have any money. I can't credibly teach about wealth and freedom if I'm working a 9 to 5 and I've got a side hustle and I live in a dingy little 1-bedroom flat in Milton Keynes or something. No one's going to listen to me.
Yeah.
So all those things are entirely congruent. And what are your top three highest values? What are somebody else? We're all different.
Yeah. Yeah.
But here's the trick. You know what your highest three values are. You might not have written them down and they might not be clear to you, but read the values factor, go onto his website for free and do the values determination exercise. And you'll get a report and do it every 6 months. And I can't understand why that isn't taught in schools and why everybody wouldn't do it. Once you know what your top three highest values are, the technique that you need to learn, and it's in the book, is called linking. How do you link money to your top three highest values? Now, if family were one of your top three, and it isn't always, but if family were one of your top three highest values, and in that context, to go back to what I told you about my mum, if your mum was within your top three highest values and you link it properly, well, if I've got money, if I've got wealth, and if I've got time, well, I can spend time with my mother. That's all good. But I need to be wealthy because she's going to need me at some point.
Yeah.
Most people, when they get old, they'll have health issues. They might need to go into a care facility, maybe a nursing home. And I don't know if you have any experience of this or your listeners do. But yeah, in the UK, you can go into a state-run care facility, but not until you've only got £16,000 left. So in other words, you've completely eradicated all of your savings and whatever. They won't give you a penny. And I've been, for various reasons, into state-run care facilities. And this isn't in any way to talk negatively about the people that work there because they're doing a job and they're doing their best. But they really are desperate places. It's where you go to die. And they don't have the resources. They don't have the money. And my mother is not going to go into a state-run care home.
Yeah.
And again, and you don't need me to tell you this, but if you want a top-end care facility with nice views and a lovely place, you're probably talking £5,000 a week.
Wow.
So you're talking £250,000 a year. And if you link things in your head, that's just a random example, but if you link in your head family, mother with, my mum's 82 now, she's going to need this, this, and this probably. I need to put myself in a position financially where I can support a bit. I wouldn't be here. She brought me into this world. So the least I can do is look after her at the other end of her life and make it comfortable and, whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's called linking. So why do you want the money? Well, if you've listened to anything I've said, virtually every episode of everything I do, money matters, for instance. Money does matter.
Yeah.
But it's not about the money. It's about the choices that money gives you.
Yes.
And that's it, really. And that's how you fix your mindset, because many people think, especially if you're a Catholic or many religions, they think that somehow money is evil, or if they're better educated, they think that the love of money is evil. And what they probably don't realize is that the Vatican is the Catholic Church is the richest institution on the planet. It owns a bank. And, so come on. It's like, really?
Yeah.
And even to get biblical on you, Jesus himself says in the New Testament, while you're on earth, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So give to the establishment, he doesn't mean give it to some dead emperor. He's like, what he means is the government of the time happened to be the Roman Empire. So pay your taxes.
Yeah.
You be part of the system is my interpretation of that. So there's nothing unethical, or there's nothing that will destroy your morals, or there's nothing that's unreligious, as far as I know, in any of the major religions, about money is bad. But so many people, and I can only really talk knowledgeably about Catholics, so many Catholics carry this guilt that somehow becoming wealthy is bad. Because there's so many poor people in the world. We shouldn't be wealthy. We should give our money to them. Well, if you give your money to them, you're never going to be wealthy. And if you're not wealthy, you can't help anybody else. Because my ambition over the next few years, specifically by the time I'm 65, I'm 60 this year, is to be a billionaire. Why do I want to be a billionaire? I want to be a billionaire because I want to join the Giving Pledge. What's the Giving Pledge? The Giving Pledge is a public platform where you're pledging to give away at least half of your net wealth.
Wow.
So 500 million. I know several people here, like Stelios, for instance. Stelios, the guy that founded EasyJet. He's a member of the Giving Pledge. He joined in 2017. John Caldwell, he's a multi-billionaire. He made his money in mobile phones. Because if you want to like give to good causes or something, the sad fact is that 98% of your contribution is just wasted. It doesn't to the end user. It's not good enough for me. I want to give half of my wealth directly to the people that need it, but not in a patronizing way. I'm going to pat you on the head and give you some money. It's in an enabling way that enables them to become wealthy.
I love that.
That's my mission.
Yeah. It's empowering people. Yeah. I love that.
Anyone can do it. Anyone can do it.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much for all of that information. I think that's a great segue into some questions that we received from EnvisionAir listeners. Actually, we actually put a call out. We told the EnvisionAir community that you were coming, and we've had so many questions come in.
Okay,
I'm gonna choose the kind of top 3 because I think we've already touched on some of them throughout the whole conversation. So I have one very specific question, and this is from a 30-something-year-old listener who has a partner. She's married, and this is what she's asked. Traditionally, I've been told never to sell your first property. Is that true? I own a flat with my husband, which has significantly increased in price over the last several years by $100K. We're looking to buy a house in the next 2 to 3 years when fixed mortgage ends. And we may receive some family money, we may receive some family money. We would love to be in a position to own more than one property then, but we're not sure whether we'll be able to sell the flat, whether we should sell the flat, buy, keep. We don't know what to do. So do you have any advice for kind of that sort of short-term planning?
Of course, fantastic. And the lady that sent that in is obviously, she's well ahead of the curve because she's actually had advice that don't sell your first property. Most people would never have heard of that, so it's obvious to her. So that's a great first start. What did I do with my first property? I bought it, and this is a long time ago, everybody. I bought it for £9,000. I lived in it for 18 months. I refurbished it, and I sold it for £33,000 18 months later. So I added value to it. The slowest way in which to become wealthy through property is just buy property and wait. So here's a little expression for you. Don't wait to buy houses, just buy houses and wait. You'll become wealthy. But it's going to take 30, 40, 50 years. So it isn't about should you buy it or should you sell it. It's about what else could you do? It's like the opportunity cost. What else could you do with that money? So I think your listener said that she was maybe going to have £100,000 of equity or value in the house. The question arises, well, what could you do with that? And just to give maybe some ideas, if that was sold and £100,000 went into the bank account, the first thing that everybody must know in the United Kingdom, really, really important, no tax. When you sell your PPR, it's called your primary principal residence, no tax. It's the only property investment that's got zero income tax, zero capital gains, zero tax of any kind. So that's $100K straight in your back pocket. Flipping or buying and selling, flipping is the property name for it. Residential property is the best single way to generate tax-free money. So it sounds like quite a romantic situation, getting married, they want their dream home, whatever. Think about self-build. Think about building your own property. So just really quickly to give you some next steps on that. Let's say you sold it now, dear listener, whatever your name is, and you got 100K in the bank. Well, all local councils in the United Kingdom have to have a register of plots that they have to sell to you that you can build your own house on. It's free to register. You could register with every local authority in the whole of the country if you want. One of my sons is doing this at the moment. He paid £25,000 for this plot in the Highlands. He's married to a Scottish girl. Beautiful place. So, build a house. Next resource I want to give you is the Build Store. So it's just thebuildstore.co.uk. The Build Store is a one-stop shop, really, if you want to build your own property. And they will give you the architect's plans, because architect's plans can be really expensive, but they've got hundreds to choose from off the shelf, next to nothing, because they're already done. They will also supply all the building materials. So, it's like a Lego kit, in inverted commas. If you've got the plan and you've got the bill of materials, it's called, they'll just give you all that. They will recommend builders in your area, so to get it built. So you've got the kit, you've got the plans, you've got the drawing, but here's the best bit. Once you've bought the plot, which you could easily do for £100,000, then you don't need any more money. The Build Store itself will give you a mortgage for everything.
Wow.
And it's released in what's called stage payments. Why is that a suggestion from me on this particular question? It's just intuition. But if that couple want to set up their dream life in a dream house, typically it's 3 to 2. It's like some money for the plot, some money for the build, and then profit. So let's say that you put 100K as a deposit, you then spent another 200K building it. So let's say you've spent 300,000. The end value is going to be, the market value is going to be somewhere between 450 and £500,000. So you will have created hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of equity. And if you then want to take that into an investment journey, you could, because it's a residential mortgage, that's the cheap where you live, that's the cheapest mortgage you'll ever get. And if you wanted to, you could put a mortgage fairly comfortably as high as 90% on that. So let's say it's a £500,000 house, you'd keep £50,000 in there as a deposit. You could release £450,000, pay off the build cost and everything, which was 300. So you'd be left with 150 tax-free. So you're living in your dream £500,000 house. You've got £150,000 tax-free that you can use as your little war chest to go off and take the world over.
Wow. Amazing.
Just as an example.
Sure. But these are, again, so much creative solutions, and all within, and everything you're saying is within the sort of permitted legalities that we live in the UK. So
100%.
Yeah, love that. Thank you. The second question is from a listener in her mid-20s, and she asked the question, what is the first step? Oh, sorry. How do you decide what is a good investment property? What things do you look for?
Good investment property. Okay, so the critical thing for an investment property for me is that it pays you rather than you pay it. So what do I mean by that? Let's say that you were, relatively well-heeled, or you'd come from an affluent family or something. And I see this quite often. And you've got maybe £200,000, £300,000, £400,000 because, the bank of mum and dad has given it to you, and off you go. And you decide to buy an investment property in Zone 2 or Zone 3 London or something. And you buy £1 million house with your £250,000 deposit. Completely wrong thing to do, because stamp duty, taxes associated with purchasing the property are astronomical. For a £900,000 house as an investment property, you're going to be paying £60,000 or £70,000 in stamp duty, in tax. The yield, so yield is just rent times 12 divided by the property price. The yield is going to be 2 or 3%. In other words, the rent that you will receive versus the capital value of the property will be tiny. Therefore, if the interest rate goes above 3 or 4%, you will lose money. Okay.
Wow.
So you want to be looking for an investment yield of at least 7%. And typically you can't do that in London. You can, but you would need experience. You would need more advanced property strategies. You can't just go to the estate agent and buy a house. Therefore, I would choose an investment area that wasn't London, and I've no idea where this lady lives. And I'd be looking for yields of at least 7%. But what I would do, me personally, is I would stress test it, the investment that is, so that the mortgage rate could go up to 10% and you would still break even.
Yes.
Because I can't envisage a mortgage rate of double digits anymore. I could envisage 6, 7%. So just make sure, 6, 7, 8%, do the calculations. You're not losing money. And a great resource for that is the BBC, the good old British Broadcasting Corporation. If you just Google BBC mortgage calculator, put in all the numbers, and it will tell you repayment mortgage, interest only mortgage. And it also says, be careful, at 12% mortgage rate, your payments will be. So, it does it all for you.
Amazing. Perfect. Thank you so much. And the final question, this is from a woman in her 30s, listener in her 30s, and she's asking, what are the top 3 things Paul would advise someone in their 30s to do if they're looking to buy a property for residential purposes and separately for investment purposes?
Top 3 things. Okay. Well, I guess I'm going to go slightly non-financial. Let's do the residential one first. Inspiration to draw from within. So motivation for me is an external factor. Inspiration is to draw from within. It's you. No one's making you do it.
Yeah.
Inspiration is probably the single biggest factor in developing a positive mindset. So your surroundings need to inspire you. So the most important thing for me, and so much of it is visual, because we even talk about having a vision.
Yeah.
So what we can see, our surroundings, the environment, that's the number one important thing for a house, for a home. I mean, that's why some people say, Christ, Paul, you live in a museum. I've got works of art, I've got whatever, but it inspires me. So everything you can see pretty much, like that olive tree painting on the wall over there, that's an original. I went to find the best painter of olive trees in the world. He happens to live in Athens. I convinced him to do it. So that inspires me.
Yes. Yes.
For example, and I'm not saying you should go and don't buy a house, buy an olive tree. I'm not, but what I am saying is the number one criteria for wherever you live is something that you find aspirational, inspirational and aspirational.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number 2, almost within reason, any part of the UK, I don't really care what you do. I care that you do it. So number 2 piece of advice is just go and buy it. Because so many people get involved in analysis paralysis. They just do. They'll analyze the backside of everything. And with the animal kingdom, people talk about fight or flight.
Yes.
That's less than 1%. 99% of animals will freeze. Humans are no different. They will do nothing. And if they're given too much choice, their decision will be, I'm not making a decision, which is obviously not good.
Right.
Third part of that calculation would be, and this is the mercenary business person in me, how can I add value? What can I do to this property to make it more valuable? There's 3 elements of how you add value, and only 3. You add value in purchase price. So if the market price is 200 and you've got the opportunity to buy it for 150, whatever the numbers are, because it's distressed or whatever. So buy well. That's the first point of value. And people seem to go nuts with property, especially residential property. Oh, I can get a mortgage of 300k and I've got a 50k deposit. Therefore, I'm going to spend 350,000. They don't actually think, well, if I could get something that I'm inspired by for 330, well, I'll save £20,000. I'm on £30,000 a year. After tax, it's £20,000. £20,000 is still £20,000. It's going to take me a year to earn it.
Yeah.
Little tip for everybody. Whenever you're thinking about the difference between 320 and 350, which most people would say, oh, I'll pay the 350. Don't look at it as money. Work out how many hours, months, or years it would take you to earn that money. Because if time's your most valuable asset, you're not giving money for it. You're giving your life away.
Yes.
Maybe not directly, but you had to earn that money.
Yes.
How long did it take you?
Yeah.
So one of my sayings is the true value of everything is the amount of time it took you to earn that. So, it's not, you want a desk, you want a laptop, you want a house. How long did it take you to earn that money?
Yeah.
So that's buy well. Second thing, what can you do to it? Ideal world, it will be very, very tired. By tired, I don't mean you need to rebuild it, but the decoration will be awful. Maybe the carpets are horrible. Maybe the kitchen needs to be changed or something, but you don't need to knock it down. So over the years, as you live in it, you can gradually refurbish it and you'll add value. And the third way that you add value is by your exit. So if you were going to sell it, for example, just to give you an idea on that, let's say that you started doing short-term lets in it and you'd built up essentially an income stream, even while you're living there.
Yeah.
That will make the property more valuable. So you're not selling it as a house. You've added value by an income stream. You can then sell it for more money. So purchase, refurbishment, and exit are the 3 points. So that will be for your home.
Yeah.
For investment property, I would say the same three things: buy well, refurbish well, and exit well. That would be maybe number one. Number two, I've already talked about it in the previous one. Make sure that your stress test is, make sure it pays you, not you pay it.
Yeah.
And number three, have an eye to capital appreciation. So I'm not saying this will be forever, but at the moment, the two places that I'm investing, relatively significant amounts of money in residential property are Manchester and Birmingham, because the capital costs are relatively low compared to London. Capital appreciation is high. And there's a block in Manchester called Deansgate, for instance. Savills, big property organisation, did a report on it recently. In the last 18 months, rent went up in this particular block. There's over 1,000 properties in this block. The rent went up by 42% in the last 18 months. So be aware of rental growth and capital growth. And I would say this, wouldn't I? But just get educated, for Christ's sake. I mean, everybody in the UK pretty much can drive a car. What do you think the odds of passing the driving test would be if you just got in the car and turned it on? I mean, you'd kill people, you would crash, you would whatever. So driving a car is relatively low added value compared to being a good property investor. You buy driving lessons, buy some property lessons. It's not any different.
Yeah.
And make sure whoever you go to for education knows what they're doing.
100%. And the $1 million question, that's just my question. And in obviously the premise of this whole episode is it too late to invest in property in 2024?
No. No. In order to meet the rising population in the UK, this is UK centric, but it's true in North America as well. The population is rocketing up. So just last year alone, for instance, net migration to the UK was 750,000 people. So either births or people arriving or, whatever. So the population went up by 750,000 just from net migration. Add on births, add on the fact people are living longer, add on, sadly, the fact that more and more people are getting divorced. So there's more and more single households. So there's all these reasons why more properties are needed. The Financial Times 2 weeks ago actually did a fantastic article on that. Research from Heriot-Watt University and whatever, I won't bore you with the details, but essentially the UK needs 500,000 new homes a year to keep up with demand. Last year, the UK built 170,000. So there are 3 homes required for every one that's being built. So you've got this massive supply shortage. You've got a massive excess of demand from all the extra people. You've got a government that doesn't care or doesn't understand because they've done nothing for the last 20 years to increase the rate of house building. You could take a line through the last 20 years of property completions, houses being built, and it's 150,000. It hasn't moved for 20 years.
Wow.
So if you've got huge demand, no supply, and cheap money, and you can leverage, you can borrow 75% of the product cost, it's going to go up.
Amazing. So But just before we wrap up, we have the EnvisionAir questionnaire. And
Okay.
this is a funny thing because it's a fun feature of the podcast where we ask guests to reflect on their past, present, and future
Mhm.
before we wrap up. But funny enough, you have actually answered two of the questions that we
Okay.
normally ask guests. So the one that's outstanding. So I will tell you the two that you answered. So the first one was reflecting in your present moment. If you could have dinner with one person in the world tonight, who would it be? And we know it's Dr. DeMartini. So that's very
Yeah.
that's done. And then the other question was, what's one goal you'd like to achieve in the next 5 years? And you've already
Billionaire.
mentioned, yeah. So anyway, unless you want to change your answers, I have one
No.
more question for you. Okay. So this is looking back towards your past. If
Mhm.
you could give your 15-year-old self any advice, what would it be and why?
15-year-old self. Jesus. Okay. Well, actually, I was out at the cinema last night and I saw Dune 2,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
which I love. And I read Dune when I was 15.
Okay.
And the lead character in Dune is called Paul, and he's 15. So, it all kind of fit together.
Yeah.
And so rather than giving myself any advice, well, yeah, this is kind of advice. I would learn more from Dune, and I,
Mm.
and I would read more. One of the things that I learned in my 20s was speed reading. If you believe that education is valuable, one of the things Dr. John DeMartini says is you might out earn me, but first you'll have to outlearn me.
Yeah.
And if you think that a lot of education and learning would come from reading, then I wish I'd learned to speed read at 15. I learned to speed read at 23. So a normal person's reading speed is 150 words a minute, maybe 200 words a minute, in that kind of bracket.
Mm.
My reading speed is 850 words a minute. So I can read a normal book in about 40 minutes. So I read 1 or 2 books a day. Dr. DeMartini is a show off. He reads 3. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, learn to speed read.
Love that. I mean, that's good advice that I'm going to start doing. I think I need to learn speed reading because I love reading, but I'm unfortunately a little bit slower. So
Well,
anyway,
go to Dr. DeMartini's website, download his speed reading course. I think it's about $50.
yeah, worth it.
And
Amazing.
it's 2 days, I think.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul. You have such an incredible, generous spirit, and I so appreciate you coming on the podcast. And this has been so fruitful. And I know it's going to really, I think it's possibly going to change some lives of
Yeah.
listeners. So thank you again for everything. And if anybody wants to connect with you, what's the best way? Is it Instagram? Is it YouTube?
Instagram's fine, YouTube's fine. I would probably say simplest way, because I travel a lot, would be just the website, touchstoneeducation.co.uk. Oh, no, sorry, .com is easier, isn't it?
Okay.
Touchstoneeducation.com.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I'll put everything in the show notes and all your links, and people can follow you. And we just want to say thank you again so much. And for sending you and Aniko lots of love.
Thank
And
you.
thank you again. Thank you.
Look after yourself, Nicole. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone, for listening to the EnvisionAir podcast. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this podcast so that you stay up to date on all of our new episodes.